Hey everyone, this is your professor speaking. So today we're going to review one, two, three, four anonymous responses to the integration prompt in class exercise that was done on June 10th. You'll recall we read Chopra's speech for homework and then we watched a Vice News clip in class, and the prompt called you to integrate what you learned from Vice News into Chopra's argument. And so, what I'm realizing that I think will be really helpful is if we sort of word for word go over each individual prompt and the different words that are present in the prompt and talk about what they mean. So I'm going to do that on Monday. So if you feel like some of the issues that you're having are when you see the prompt and it says make sure you have reasoning, make sure you explain validity and all of those different words and you don't know what they mean, um, definitely make it a point to attend class on Monday because we're going to go over each prompt. I'm not going to go over them right now though because I do want to talk about the four responses that we have in front of us and what's working and what's not working so that hopefully it can help you improve your own writing. And so what I have here you'll see is the actual, well, like a summary of what the prompt actually called for. So we just want to remember it was about Chopra's argument, right? So Chopra is making several, if not dozens of arguments about the student loan crisis. So you pick which argument you're interested in and find a way to integrate whatever Vice News is saying into that argument. So, well, not whatever Vice News is saying, something that Vice News is saying. So, for example, Chopra argues that much of the problem related to the student loan crisis is related to financial industries such as the bank, right? Financial institutions like the bank. And so if I wanted to have that be a response, what I might, and I'll put this here, I might say first, Chopra argues that the student loan crisis is due to financial institutions, right? So that's the argument that the actual passage is making. And what I would want to do now is figure out a way to explain how he proves that argument. So when I read the speech, he gives examples, right? So Chopra explains banks are usually the last set of eyes that see a loan application and can determine whether or not a student should qualify for a loan. So the idea that Chopra talks about is banks are actually the last people that see these loan applications, see the amount of money that is being given to a certain individual, and knows a lot about their background. Now, not an exorbitant amount of information, but they are the last set of eyes that know, okay, so this is student A who is going to this college and wants this amount of money, and this is their current tax status. And so, if they're the last set of eyes, shouldn't they be held accountable? So that would be an example of me figuring out an argument and a way that Chopra proves his argument for this exercise. Now, the issue that I will run into, and the only reason I'm doing this is because a lot of you ran into this issue, is I don't believe there's any point in the Vice News video clip where we see anything related to the banks. And the reason why we are in the student loan crisis is because of the banks, right? And so, what a lot of you have done is you figure out these really great arguments that Chopra is making, and you tell me how he proves it. And then, when you realize Vice News isn't talking about that argument, you sort of say, oh, well, I'll just still talk about it anyway, which I understand because of time constraints. But I just want you to realize that for the actual ALST exam, that wouldn't work. So some of you might be saying in Vice News, Obama talks about being uninformed. And then you go on to explain how he talks about being uninformed. The issue with this is that is not connected to what Chopra is saying, and you're not explaining how it is connected, and therefore it doesn't work. So, what we would want to do if we realize, oh no, the graph, the chart, the video does not talk about what it is I just brought up, then you would want to adjust this. You would want to revise this. So, maybe the best approach would be to figure out first, what is Vice News actually arguing? What is Vice News talking about? So Vice News is talking about being uninformed. It is talking about the financial responsibility families have. Is there any mention of that in Chopra's article? Hopefully all of you are saying, well, yes, there is, and you're absolutely right. Chopra argues that the student loan crisis, the student loan crisis is in part due to new responsibilities that families have to take on in addition to paying student loan debt. So there's mention where he talks about, remember the 35-year-old head of household? This idea that the face of the person who's taking out loans is no longer a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old who can graduate and slowly pay off their loans because they are, without kids, without major responsibilities. The face of someone taking out student loans is someone who might be 35, 40, 28, with a couple of kids, with one kid, with a sick grandmother, with an older parent. They have many responsibilities. And so that's what Chopra is arguing. It's not that people don't want to pay their student loans anymore. It's that those who are taking out student loans don't exist in the same way that they used to. And so I pointed out, Chopra argues that the student loan crisis is in part due to new responsibilities that families have to take on in addition to paying student loan debt. He proves this argument using, how does he prove this argument? Does he use logos? Does he use pathos? Does he use ethos? So he proves this argument citing the difference in college students now versus years ago, right? And then what you would say is in Vice News, or really it should be in the Vice News clip, Obama talks about, now we've changed our position, right? So we want to connect it to this argument that we've created. So in the Vice News clip, Obama talks about college students now also having to, well, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? So in the Vice News clip, Obama and high school and college students, discuss the changes in financing a college education. Obama also notes the change in the typical college student. Similar to Chopra, President Obama, I guess I should stick with Obama since I've been doing Obama. Okay, so similar to Chopra, Obama notes now parents are having to finance their children's college tuition while also having to finance their children's college tuition consecutively. In other words, there's a bit about, you have one child, 2 years later, you have another child who has to go to college. So you have to consecutively finance their tuition. I'm not going to continue this because I do want to get to the rest of the clip. I don't want you guys to think of this as a 3-hour movie, but hopefully you get the point that the biggest part of this prompt and the biggest part of this skill synthesis is figuring out the connection. If you don't figure out the connection, then what you have is a paragraph that's talking about two completely separate ideas, and that's never what you want, okay? Oh, sorry, this is a typo. Okay. Now let's go to the example. So again, we're integrating a piece of Vice News into one of Chopra's arguments. So what we have here is one sample response. It's in purple, and then you'll see the rest. All right. Mostly young students are suffering because they do not have money to pay for their college. Some of also need financial support for their family. I have seen video about education, and Obama was saying how education is important and federal government have to lower the tuition for students so they can focus more in school. So this evaluation will be more grammar based, but I do think it's useful because a lot of us are struggling with the same grammatical issues. You'll notice in my previous YouTube video, I mentioned something about sentence structure. I mentioned that it's important to understand the way because works, and I want to reiterate because when it's in the middle of a sentence serves as a comma in itself. And what that means is you don't need punctuation before or after it. The only time you need a comma when you're dealing with because is when you're starting your sentence off with because. So an example of that would be because students do not have enough money, they are suffering. And so you'll remember because students do not have enough money, they are suffering. You'll remember because students do not have enough money is a dependent clause, right? If I were to read this or say this out loud, someone would say, "Wait, what's left? Is there something else that you're going to tell me?" And so because of that, there should be a comma after the phrase. They are suffering is a complete sentence in itself. That's why it's considered an independent clause. And so the rules of commas are when you have a dependent clause and then an independent clause, there should be a comma that separates it. So I'm not going to go over all the rules. If you want to become re-familiar with those rules, you can visit the previous YouTube video that I created, or you might want to visit OWL Purdue and in the search box, look up sentence structure, and they lay out all of the rules. Okay, so that's the first thing. And why is that so important? Well, this is not even an ALST thing. This is just a general writing thing. When you misuse commas, or as this student had a semicolon, you change the meaning of sentences, and that could lead to confusion. So when you have a semicolon, what you're indicating is these two ideas are separate, that these two ideas can function by themselves, that these two ideas are kind of connected, but really they're unrelated. They're talking about two different aspects of possibly the same topic. And if you read it in that way, it doesn't make sense. Because if I see mostly young students are suffering, separate idea, because they do not have money to pay for their college, I don't know where the because is coming from. Because what? What's the cause? I'm unsure, and so it becomes confusing. And that's why we need to have a clear understanding of how to use punctuation. So I'm going to leave this up, but note, if we just eliminate the semicolon, mostly young students are suffering because they do not have enough money to pay for their college. That works. Now we have some of. This is another thing that I think mostly happens if English is your second language, or if you are used to talking in text speak. Now, when you're doing text speak, or when your English is your second language, sometimes you spell things based on the way that they sound. So, and for some reason, have and of, when we're talking, sounds the same. And so when you want to say have, instead you'll spell out of. And this happens a lot when you think of could have, right? Because when we say could have, it sounds like could have, but what you're actually saying is could have. Now, the only way to understand how to avoid this mistake is to review prepositions. Review prepositions, because if you review prepositions, you'll note of is a preposition that should not be used in this situation. So I'm going to, actually I should just get rid of this. Some have need by, wait, now what did I do? Okay. Some have also need financial support for their family. Now what happens is we have the correct verb here, right? We realized we didn't want to use the preposition of, we wanted to use the verb have. Have is past tense. So if we have some have also need, this verb should be in past, what did I do? Sorry. This verb should also be in past tense because have is past tense, need should be in past tense. So some have also needed financial support for their family. Again, when you're dealing with tenses, you want to be consistent. So in this sentence, if you are starting us off with have, which is past tense, then you need to continue that pattern by putting needed. I know some of you tense aficionados might be saying, well, then why is she talking, or he or she talking in present progressive tense here? Shouldn't this also be past? And what I will say is this sentence is talking about something that is going on right now. And so for that reason, present progressive is okay. I believe when this student is talking about this particular group of students who need financial support, she's referring to students in the past, and so that's why it changes to the past. Now, for me, this shift is okay because it's consistent within the sentence. If you have present progressive here, past tense here, present progressive here, then it becomes problematic, okay? Now we have this sentence. Now you'll remember what I talked about when it came to academic voice. I said part of academic voice is being clear and also just giving facts, not narrating the experience of writing the paper. And this is exactly what I mean when I say narrating the experience of writing the paper. What you're doing is you're telling me, so I watched this, then I read this, and this is what I learned. We don't need that in an academic response or an academic paper. Instead, you would eliminate you, and you would say, according to Vice News, education is important, and federal government have to lower the tuition for students so they can focus more in school. Perfect. There are plural issues, and I will point you to one, and then I'm going to move on. Education is important, and federal government. Now, when you're talking about a specific federal government, right, you're not talking about all federal governments. You're talking about the United States federal government. You should be using the article the. So education is important, and the federal government have to lower. When you have a singular subject, and the federal government is a singular subject, right? It's one entity, then the verb should be singular as well. The singular form of have is has. So the federal government has to lower the tuition for students so they can focus more in school. Again, a plural issue. If you're saying student, then this pronoun should be he. If you're saying they and you're referring to a group of students, then you need to have this be plural. So it should either be has to lower the tuition for students so they can focus more in school, or lower the tuition for a particular student so he or she can focus more in school. Whatever you choose, you just need to be consistent. And then we have, moreover, I am agree with the video because most of the student does not find information how to get their loans and paying for their classes. So at that point, some of them suffer for their academic needs. Government decreases the tuition every student will be able to get his or her education. Sometimes students do not know how many classes they have to take to complete their education right time or graduate on time to receive right amount of money from government. So if students receive information, let's stop here. So again, the I is not necessary here. However, if you wanted to leave it, what you have to deal with is the misuse of the to be form of to be am. When you're saying I am, there are many different reasons you should be using it. If you're talking about something that is permanent, right? I am a girl. That would be an appropriate usage of am, something that is permanent. I won't list it out. I keep forgetting that you can hear me. So it's permanent. The next thing is if you're talking about something that's a state, a condition. So I am happy, right? Actually, I do think it's useful. So I am happy. I am a girl. The next instance where you would want to use am is if you're dealing with present progressive form of a verb. So if you are saying that you are doing something in this moment, you're continuously doing something in this moment, then you could also use I am. But when you're using I am, remember present progressive form of most verbs ends in ing. So if you wanted to keep this as I am agree, it should be I am agreeing with the video. Now, the awkward thing about using present progressive here is you're not continuously agreeing with the video. And if you say I am agreeing with the video, it almost sounds as though you're having a conversation with someone rather than writing a paper. And so for that reason, I would get rid of am and just let it be I agree. Moreover, I agree with the video. And again, you'll remember what I said about because and commas, because most of the student, and again, plural, most of the students, and then this would have to become plural as well. The plural form of does is do. Most of the students do not find, or you can say because a student does not find. So if you want to change it to singular, that's fine, but you have to be consistent. The other thing I want you to, what am I doing? The other thing I want you to be aware of is when you're dealing with most, that indicates that the thing that you are describing should be plural. Most students, right? Most buildings. Most indicates plural. And I just want to give you a couple of ones that people have been using frequently. Most is plural, plural subject. Every should be a singular subject, right? Think each and every. So every student, every building, the subject should be singular. And then each, that should also be singular. So each student, each building, each and every, that's all singular subjects. So if you're using these words, you want to be careful on what the subject is, because some of you are giving me most and then your subject is singular, or you're giving me every and your subject is plural. You want to make sure you are using those words correctly. Okay, so that I got distracted. Okay, so at that point, some of them suffer for their academic needs. For me, this is just something that's unclear. I don't know how someone could suffer for their academic needs. That needs clarification for me. And then government decreases the tuition, then every student will be able to get his or her education. Sometimes students do not know how many classes they have to take to complete their education, right time. Again, this is something looking up prepositions would rectify. They have to take to complete their education on time or at the right time, but there needs to be a preposition there. Okay, so I'm going to stop doing grammatical things and just quickly give you a holistic, in terms of the rubric. So this would really score about a 1 or 2 out of 4 on the actual ALST exam. I would say probably a 1 out of 4. And again, we are learning, so this is in no way an attack or in no way trying to criticize, but it's important that we understand the kind of work that we need to do before we take the exam, or the kind of work we need to do before we further before we take other writing intensive classes. So you'll remember the prompt called for integrating Vice News into Chopra's argument. So what we have here is a lot of Vice News, but we don't have anything about Chopra's argument. Now, some of you are saying, well, I don't care about or not some of you might be thinking, Why should I care about the prompt if I'm not taking the ALST exam? The importance in well, number one, you're not going to score well in this class because I'm grading you based on how you are responding to the prompt. But number two, when you're in other classes, your professor is asking you to respond to something specific. And it's important to be able to deconstruct professors' rubrics, professors' assignment guidelines, so that you do exactly what it is they're asking you to do. So here what I have is mostly a summary of the Vice News clip, but I don't have anything that has to do with integration. I have no indication of how Chopra is related, and so for that reason, it sort of misses the mark. You always want to make sure you're doing, I think if there was a list of things you always want to ensure you're doing for a paper, number one would be answering the question that your professor has proposed. Not because professors are narcissistic, super important, and you have to do whatever they say, but because it for a teacher or for an instructor, it confirms that you understood, that you comprehended the assignment, and you understood what was expected of you. And if you weren't able to do that, then that could dramatically impact your grade. And for you guys who are teaching, this is something important for you guys to know. The fabulous thing about prompts and creating instructions is it's one clear way of ensuring your students are reading and comprehending the material that they're reading. Okay, so enough about this. Hopefully this covered most of the questions that you might have had about this particular prompt. In case it didn't, though, we are going to go to our second example response. This one will be less grammatical. Chopra argues that student loans are causing young adults to live in distress. Chopra explains that after leaving college, the career salaries are not enough to pay off any debt owed for higher education. During the discussion on Vice News, President Obama speaks to different students from different backgrounds in order to see what type of issues they are going through. He realizes that a lot of students face these student loans with the burden of debt over their heads, making it difficult to buy their first homes, to pay it off in time, or even see the reason why they took out the loans in the first place. The president comes up with many solutions, but the one that caught my attention was him proposing that community colleges should be made free so that when you transfer to a 4-year college, you will only have to pay for 2 years instead of 4. So you'll notice this falls trap to what I mentioned before, where you lay out an excellent argument that Chopra is making, and then you realize Vice News might not necessarily be connected to that argument, but you sort of, because of time, continue on anyway. And so for that reason, you tell me Chopra talks about career, but then in Vice News, you're talking about the need to buy a home, or the inability to buy a home, and possible solutions. There's no clear connection for me. And then the other thing is I bolded this because you don't necessarily need to summarize what's going on in the video in this prompt response. It's more important to immediately tell me where the correlation is. So what's interesting to me is I wonder if somehow this student could have possibly made the connection between what President Obama is saying and what Chopra is saying. For example, if Chopra is talking about career salaries being not enough to pay off debt, perhaps what President Obama is doing is saying, yeah, not only is it that they're not able to pay their debt because their careers are not giving them enough money, but they're also not being able to buy a home. They're also not being able to, you know, get out of their debt and make other possibly financially smart decisions. That might have been a strong connection, but that needs to be present in the actual writing. And so for that reason, this would also score a 2 out of 4. And again, not criticizing, but this is just how the ALST exam works. If you don't cover all of the bullet points of the prompt, then you don't get the full credit. So I'm going to now go to the next one. All right, and let me just put this all on one page. The student loan debt is becoming a crisis for students across America. Chopra's focus is that students should be given a form of leniency for their debt when there's difficulty in finding job opportunities after graduation. According to the Vice News clip that featured a speech and discussion with Obama, there's a serious setback and misguidance on loans and debts for students entering and graduating college. There is an agreement that there is 40 million students in debt because of student loans, but there is no true understanding of knowing how to pay it off. Students should use their resources and understand that there are scholarships, programs, alternate routes. President Obama states that Congress is in the works. The resources are, sorry. So just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through the whole thing. It's in front of you, so if you want to skim through it quickly, you absolutely can. My main point of contention with this response is, again, I don't see the clearest connection between what Chopra is saying and what Vice News is saying. But I also wanted clarification when the student says there is an agreement. There's an agreement between who? I'm unsure what that means, because if there's an agreement between Chopra and Vice News, that's very different than there is an agreement between the students, President Barack Obama, and the Vice News correspondent. So I feel like that little lack of clarity might have altered my understanding of this prompt entirely. So what you're saying here is Chopra talks about the need for leniency, and Vice News talks about the need for students to be informed. So how is leniency and being informed connected? That needs to be clarified. Is it that if there is more leniency, that will make up for the fact that students were uninformed? Is it that students are uninformed and so we can't fault them, so we have to be lenient when asking for their loans back? That needs to be clarified. And that is something that you as a student are able to do, meaning like you can make that connection. You can say, when Chopra talks about leniency, what he is saying is because the students are so uninformed, there needs to be a better way of getting back the money. And President Obama, strengthens that argument when he says, yes, students are severely uninformed. They don't know about scholarships. They don't know about other ways to get their degrees. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. This would again score a 2.5 out of 4. The reason why I would score a 2.5 maybe instead of a 2 is because of the clear indication of what Chopra's argument is, and also the clear indication of what the Vice News argument is. The only reason it wouldn't score a 4 out of 4, or the big reason why it wouldn't score a 4 out of 4, is because the two arguments aren't being connected. Okay, and then our last one. Chopra states that there is a distressing debt and wage trend among young Americans. I agree with this statement because some students do not fully understand how a loan works. In the Vice News clip, the students state how they feel they were not fully prepared for college in terms of loans and debt. The students stated that they did not feel they knew enough about how loans exactly work in terms of paying them off. Students then end up with loans that will take them years to repay. As Chopra stated, for students who are in debt so early in their lives, it will have negative credit. As Chopra stated, for students who are in debt so early in their lives, will have negative credit report, which will make it more difficult to pass employment verification checks or ever reach their dream of buying a home. The money invested into all these loans is money students could have been saved, invested in a home, or anything to better their future. So, the couple of things, just structural things, you'll notice there are many instances of verb tenses being incorrect. That needs to be clarified. There are many incorrect uses of commas, and I'll just point you to them, but I'm not going to go over them because I did go over it so thoroughly in the first one. Okay, so Chopra states that there is a distressing how all loans work. That's a subject plural issue. They were not knew enough about how long in terms of paying them off, interest, and their monthly student and monthly loans. as Chopra stated, for students who are in debt, so we'll have, this is a structural issue with the commas. The money invested into all these loans is money students could have been. All right, so this is a tense issue, right? Could have been. This indicates progression, progressive, and this should be ing. So could have been saving, investing in a home, or anything to better their future. So grammatically, there are a number of issues that sort of might confuse the reader. And so for that reason, immediately a point would be taken off for the ALST test graders. What does work, though, is the connection being made between Chopra and Vice News. So what this student chooses to do is say, Chopra talks about how there's a distressing trend, and the reason for this distressing trend is students don't know how loans work. And that connection is made by this statement, where she says, students don't understand how loans work, and that's why there's such a distressing trend. And then she goes on to describe how Vice News approaches this distressing trend. And so for that reason, this would score a 3 out of 4. The only reason it wouldn't score a 4 out of 4 is because, like I said, in a response, one, let's look. This, well, actually, in terms of word count, this is fine because you'll remember it's 100 to 200 words. But in a 100 to 200 word response, you're really limited to the amount of typos, grammatical issues that you can have. If you have 3, 4, 5 grammatical issues, that will ultimately reduce you by a point. And when I say you're allowed to have minor grammatical errors in these kinds of responses, minor means a possible misspelling of an author, a possible, extra E in something that doesn't need an E, but not issues that it seems to indicate a lack of grammatical knowledge. Like this doesn't seem like a typo as much as the student is unclear on how to use commas. This doesn't seem like a typo as much as the student is unclear about how to use tenses. So for those of you who are wondering what would be okay, what would be not okay, it really, what determines a grammatical issue versus a minor typo is, hey, this is something that they had to put thought into creating. So this is not something that they accidentally did. All right, so hopefully you guys are all still awake after watching this long video. If you have any concerns or any suggestions on like new videos that I should be making, obviously you could tell me in class, but you could also comment underneath. Because if you have a YouTube username, you're able to comment. And I am looking forward to seeing all of you on Monday. Remember, homework that has not been submitted for the last 2 weeks, the deadline is tomorrow, 11:59 p.m. For the sake of not missing anyone, I am asking if you have any issues with submitting on Blackboard, that you just email me the response. Please do not wait until Monday to tell me that Blackboard was giving you issues, because it will still be a 0. And I will make this an announcement so that everyone hears, even those who don't watch this video. But that's extremely important. So again, if you are not able to upload for whatever reason, just email me your response and I will email you back some feedback. All right, have an amazing weekend and I will see you Monday.